Hello everybody and welcome to the British Pint. My name is Christoph and today we are making a really special project. We are doing the full party guile from Fuller's, which means we're doing one brew and we get 3 beers. And I'm really excited for this. I did a lot of research to get this accurately and I'm trying to tell you today all the things that you would need to take into account if you want to replicate this. So let's start with the mash and the water, and then we're going to continue with the other stuff after I did the parts, because there will be some calculations that I have to do on the fly, seeing what kind of results I get. I think the mash is quite easy for most people because you have seen videos from my channel already, or you know the data. We need tons of pale ale malt, we need tons of crystal malt. This is crisp crystal 150, which is what they call light crystal, which is completely insane because this is by standard European measurements 170 EBC, not light at all. I'm using some acid malt as well. I believe that Fuller's, because they mentioned it in one of the podcasts, use lactic acid to adjust pH, so I'm going to follow that. And then we are set with the 3 main ingredients. They also use some chocolate malt to adjust color, which I'm not going to do because I do not know the exact values of these so that I could adjust to a certain value that I need in the future. Far too complicated. This is stuff that we can leave aside. So 7% of crystal malt, 3% of acid malt, 90% of pale ale malt. This is a British pale ale malt from Warminster this time. I made sure to have British one at hand. Usually I use German one because I think they are quite similar, but not 100% of course. So what we want to do is we want to mash in. We want to mash in a way that we get exactly 65 degrees, which we hold for 1 hour. Fuller's does 2.5 liters to 1 kilogram, and I'm not going to do that because I will have difficulties getting the liquid out of here. So I'm going to do 3.5 to 1. Things will change a bit. You might have already seen the video where I am tasting 2 different beers, one with a higher ratio, one with a lower ratio, to see what the effect is. I haven't recorded that one yet though. I want to publish it earlier. And so I'm going to record it this evening and then I know what you already know, maybe. So we want to mash in with water, in my case a bit more water. We want to get the profile of Fuller's quite accurately. And Fuller's has a very chalky water, which I'm going to show on the screen here. So you have a lot of calcium hydrogen carbonate, and that is going to create a lot of minerals in the first place. So they are adding gypsum, calcium sulfate, which I also have here. They add 1.33 grams per kilogram of malt, and I was quite confused by that until I realized that they just mean 1.33 grams per 2.5 liters of water, and then you have your grams per liter. If you want, you can adjust your own water according to that. My problem is I have quite a chalky water, but not that chalky. So I need to boost the calcium a bit higher to get somewhere near the levels of calcium, and also I have quite a lot of sulfate in my water. So I'm also going to use some calcium chloride. This is as a solution here. I want to do 1 gram each, so the solution I have to multiply by times 2.3 to get for 1 gram of the material. And then my own water will be also high in calcium and in sulfate as Fuller's is. Mine will be slightly more in chlorate because I'm using this one to not boost the sulfate as much, and less in hydrogen carbonate. I think this will be somewhat similar, not 100%. Now, what you need to take into account, of course, is that Fuller's only add these salts to the mash, as I will do as well. And so the total water that you get after sparging is much reduced again in these minerals, less calcium and less sulfate. So I'm going to do the same and get a diluted water in the end. And you can see the comparison of these two. It's not exactly the same, but it's going in a similar direction. That's all I need. I think that they are going to have a mash pH which is rather low, because that is what you need when you sparge with untreated water to make sure that your beer pH is not raised too much with the sparge water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to aim for a mash pH of 5.3, and for them I estimated that they are doing the same. I do not know though. Okay, that's why I'm using the amount of acid malt I do, which is 3%. Now I think we're ready. We can mash this all in. I am using triple the amount of what I usually use, so I set everything up that I will get 3 kilograms of malt. I will use the amount of water in total. Normally I use 7 liters, they use 7.4 liters, slightly more. So I will get 19.2 liters of wort probably. We'll see how the absorption of all this stuff is going to work out. I'm going to split this into 2, so I'm going to collect the first 9.6 liters in one vessel and collect the second 9.6 liters in the second vessel, and that will give me the ability to do party guile. I'm going to do these two words separately with hopping and boiling, and then afterwards I'm going to blend according to the specs I know from Fuller's. This is going to be a lot of fun. So after I collected the word, I need to measure the gravity and calculate how I want to do the hops so that I get the range of IBUs that I need. This is probably going to be a nightmare. I will probably have to do some double and triple calculations. Another thing that I need to take into account is that I cannot use my standard pots. So this is what I usually use. It collects 10 liters. And with 9.6 liters of wort in one guile, I cannot possibly use this one. It will overfoam. So what I'm going to do is split the one wort into two, use two 10-liter pots, put in like 5 liters each roughly. And then I have a third pot, which is going to be my large 36-liter pot, where I'm going to do the second guile. And then the crux is that Fuller's has very little evaporation, obviously. Big setups usually have that. They have something like 7%. And I want to get the same evaporation, so less than I usually do. But it will be really tricky because I have these large surface pots which are going to evaporate a lot. So this will be quite tricky. I might have to add some water in the end or something like that, or just let it simmer really slowly. We'll see how that works out. This is going to be a lot of fun. I will just show you how I record all the details and do the mash, and then we see each other again during the sparging or just before the boil. See you then. Alright, we are there having sparged everything. Sparging took me 5 hours, and I don't want to lie to you, it really was difficult to get this sparged because in my setup I'm not used to having that much wort in there, and also because I used the 3.5 to 1 ratio, it was actually a bit more viscous than usual, and it took me quite some time to get it going, and then it was most of the time just a slow trickle. And only later, when the grain bed had set down properly, could I increase that a bit. So we're done now. Everything's going fine so far. I measured the values of the two words, which I'm going to show on the screen because I can't possibly remember right now. I calculated what would happen if I get 7% evaporation, but the thing is I'm already above the average I wanted to get. I wanted to get an average of 10.7 degree Plato, because that is what Fuller's gets on average. And I am at, is it in Plato, I think 11.7, so a good 1 degree Plato too high. I am going to keep this now because I would need a negative evaporation rate. I would have to dilute everything, and then I get just a bit too much wort for all my fermentation vessels. So I am going to continue with 7% evaporation rate. I will see how good that goes with the different pots I have. I decided now not to use the very large one, but instead go with a combination of one of my 10-liter pots and a smaller one for the first wort, and a 10-liter pot and a smaller one for the second wort, and I think I might just manage to do that without any of them boiling over, which would be a pity. So I know the gravities that I will get after boiling, I know the liters that I get after boiling, then I can calculate some IBUs. Now what I noticed, and that is the reason why it took me half an hour to just calculate this just a minute ago, is if you do a party guile, then the stronger guile will actually have a nonlinear hop utilization rate. So it's not that if you calculate the average and you know I want to have a certain IBU on average, for Fuller's I believe that's around 32 IBU, because when you take their beers together that's roughly where you want to get. And then you think that if you split the guiles and get a certain amount of hops and split that up, you should get the right amount of IBU, but actually on the stronger guile you get less than it would be if you compare the percentages. So The hops that I use is, I went with the aroma hops in exactly the ratio in grams per liter as Fuller's does. I believe that they will have the same utilization with hop oils as I have, especially since it's just 5 minutes of the boil, so things should be quite decent. I used 10 minutes of post-isomerization time. I think that's quite important to get right, otherwise things can get very bitter. And then with the target, if I calculate the average and want to get to 32 IBU, I need 12.5 grams. If I then calculate the two guides separately and then compare how much IBU I have on average, because that is the goal I want to have, I suddenly need 14 grams of target. So I went with 14 grams of target and split them according to the ratio that Fuller's also does. I'm not sure whether the ratio of my gravities is the same as Fuller's, but that is actually something that I'm going to ignore for a moment. And also the exact mixing ratio is not something I want to get as accurate as possible. What I rather want is just do the mixing ratio that they explained in one of the later podcasts, where they say they use 3/4 strong guy, 1/4 weak guy for the ESB, half-half for London Porter, and 3/4 weak, 1/4 strong for the Chiswick Bitter. And I calculated these ratios and what IBUs and gravities I would get, and they are roughly okay. So that is what I will do. That's how I will recreate these beers. Yeah, and so I have 10 grams of cone targets. Cone is just what I have for target because I like using them as aroma hop. They're very nice citrusy. And I have 4 grams of target in the other one. And then as aroma hops, I have 10 grams of Northdown, 10 grams of Challenger, and 2 grams of Golding in the one. And 3, and 1 gram of Golding in the other one. I did use the full amount of Northdown just because it might just be that it doesn't make much difference. I am a bit scared. But how bad can it be? Kind of. Northdown is a tricky hop, and I have only had quite bad experiences so far, mostly because it is just very harsh when I use it, and I always blame that one harvest from 2020. We'll see. So yeah, I will start the boil now, and then hopefully I should get everything going. I will cool the wort down afterwards to 17 degrees and then pitch the yeast. The yeast is something I can show you now. I think that is quite decent. So what I did is I got 2 Fuller's beers that are bottle conditioned. And in Germany, this one's called Fuller's IPA, India Pale Ale. I believe that this is the same as the Bengal Lancer, and they just changed the name because in Germany nobody knows what Bengal Lancer means. And then they had a sediment. I propagated that with a small starter, just got a bit out of it. Then made a bigger starter with oat flakes, because oat flakes really help boost yeast vitality because of the lipids they have. And then I had quite a lot of sediment, and then just to be sure, I made another starter yesterday, and the yeast started fermentation within 2 hours, so that's really great. First bubbling activity was really quick. And it is in the fridge now because it was still bubbling, and now I want everything to precipitate. So I hope this will work before the night. So when everything is cooled down, I want to have the yeast ready. We'll see. I have some time. I can do it tomorrow morning. It's not too bad. And that would be everything. The yeast really sediments as a solid rock, so that is quite accurate to the fuller strength that you can buy. You might have seen in the video that I plan to publish beforehand my comparison between Imperial A09 and the Fullers that I got from these bottles. We'll see. I'm going to record that in a few minutes, so I'm really curious at how they will be. Okay, and then I will probably see you for the pitching. Until then, bye-bye. Alright, it's the next day, and overnight I let them all cool to 17 degrees in a room that I specifically prepared for that. So they're all in the right temperature. The yeast was in the same room, and overnight it precipitated very nicely, and I could actually decant the liquid. I made a video showing you how flocculent this is. It's actually gotten a bit better now, so I might be able to just stir it, and then pour everything in the right amounts where it belongs. Let's hope this will work. Yeah, so I didn't get the full amount of what I hoped for, so this is not another 4.5 liters of London Pride, but just 2 liters. I did have a lot of losses because of the hop cones, and I do have a lot higher gravities in all of these than actually necessary. I could have, if I would have had larger pots where I could have had, you know, the single guiles and just mixed them well, I could have just stretched everything to get exactly the right gravities. But now, as it is, I have quite a lot higher gravities, which is not a bad thing. It should be fine. So I'm going to try to give less than 1/4 of the liquid in here. Like this. And then 1/3 each to these here. Now what Fuller's does is they give the same amount of yeast cells per hectoliter in each of these guiles or beers. I think you can call them beer as soon as the yeast is in. So what happens is that you have a different pitch rate depending on the gravity. So you will have the most stressed yeast in the ESB because it's a lower pitching rate per hectoliter per degree Plato. You have a decent amount of London Pride. That is why they only harvest yeast from the London Pride fermenter. And you have a very fine fermentation, very little stress in the Chiswick Bitter, which makes this one less estery. So what Fuller's does actually is that everywhere in these 3 beers things scale, and not all of them proportionally. So you have the gravity that's different. You have the IBUs, which scale less. So this one is more bitter compared to the gravity than the ESB. By the way, this is the ESB, London Pride, and Chiswick Bitter, and you see just a very light increase of brightness in the color, but it's not very noticeable, just very little. So you have the bitterness that is already different from the gravity. Then you have the amount of protein and fullness that is more in the ESB because it's most of the first guile, and this is always disproportionately. Then you have the color and flavor of the crystal malt that is also dissolving, I think, quicker than the general sugar, so it's also disproportionately more in the ESB. And then also the yeast flavor will be more in the ESB than in the others. So everything is changed, and that's why these 3 beers taste actually quite different from each other, as far as I know. So 1/3 here. This is not a gigantic amount of yeast, but it should be decent because this is all pure high vitality yeasts, and it should be really happy and eager to start fermenting. I don't mind not having a large amount of yeast in there because my fermenters are actually really full. I could have gone for 4 liters each to be sure to have some headroom. A strongly flocculating yeast such as the Fuller's really does want to climb out of your fermentation vessel, so it's always good to have some extra headroom. Oh, that was actually a lot. Let's see if I can put some more in here. There we go. So at least I managed to get the yeast into a kind of emulsion, so it's not like I have these broken pieces and the liquid not mixing. That's very nice. I'm going to shake them, stir them up. Yeah, anything else I want to say? Since the sparging was so difficult, it might really make more sense next time for me to do this in the big setup where I have a sparging plate. That makes everything easier, of course, because you have guaranteed sparging efficiency and the water always runs through. But I do not do that process very often, so I would have to, you know, estimate the efficiency again and all this stuff, which I didn't want to do here. And the other thing is, as I said, I did the mixture just theoretically like 3/4, 1/4, half, 3/4, 1/4, also half in here. And that is probably going to give me a different ratio than what Fuller's uses. If you want to do this, you could actually calculate everything more in detail, but with a different evaporation rate than what I usually get, this was really difficult to estimate what I would get after boiling, and that is what you need to do. You need to be able to really know what you get after boiling. Alright, I think then everything would be ready. This would probably ferment for a week. The Fuller's fermentation schedule is something that I will try to get as well. 17 degrees pitching temperature, let it rise to 20 degrees. I have a room secluded for that. I will increase the ambient temperature to 20 degrees once fermentation is working properly. And then when the krausen starts to fall in, which is supposed to be roughly half gravity, I will decrease the temperature again to 17 degrees. I am not sure if I can manage to get all of these beers not chill haste, cold crashed and then conditioned at 12 degrees because I have a very small fridge for 12-degree temperature stuff. I might just put them at room temperature, and then of course some of the properties of the yeast that you get with the decrease to 17 degrees towards the end of fermentation will be gone. That is not too much of an issue, but if you have a proper fermentation control, use that. And okay, one thing I must not forget is the dry hop. The dry hop comes in at declaration, which means when this is declared to the taxes, which is during the pitching. So now 2.8 grams per liter for these two here, and then its target in this case. And I believe I now learned that there's a second dry hop towards the end of fermentation with Golding, but I'm not 100% sure. I might want to hear that podcast that I found recently again, where I got more details. I will link the second podcast in the description below. You will find a lot more information on the detail on the recipe in detail and in general in my previous videos, which you should check out. I will put them in the description as well. They might pop up here depending on what app and website you use. And then we should be done with everything. I will see you for the tasting in the next video. Take care and bye bye.